whenever he can just join us. So hi, welcome to our Zoom on Spring Renewal and High Holy Days. My name is Emma and I am the Social Justice Intern at the Interfaith Center. I'm a freshman and I'm majoring in Geography and Sustainable Development with a minor in Critical Race and Ethnic Studies. You might have originally seen this advertised as a panel talking about Easter traditions, but when I was talking to Dan and Jessie, I realized that there were like so many connections between all of the religions and their spring holidays that we might as well talk about everything. So starting off, I'm just going to kind of introduce everybody who's going to be speaking. And then I'm going to give them a little bit of time to talk about what tradition they personally celebrate. So Reverend Jessie Thompson and Reverend Dan Kline are co-rectors at the Church of St. Paul in the desert in Palm Springs, California. And then Abby Solov is a freshman at Miami University and is currently studying zoology with a pre-med track. And then Oner Tektosh is an intern also at the Interfaith Center. He's a freshman and he's majoring in cybersecurity and management through the Farmer School of Business. So if we just want to start off with Dan and Jessie, and you can kind of just talk about what you believe in and just like the holidays you celebrate around this time.
Thanks, Emma. It's good to see your face, actually. We talked on the phone. Yeah. It's good to see, I was going to say, we see Kaylee. So hi, Kaylee. I like seeing faces on Zoom, but it's nice to meet you all, and we're honored to be here. So we are Episcopalian priests, and that's always when they see a man in a collar, they think a Catholic priest, but they don't know what to do with me. They'll ask, like, is that a Halloween costume? Is that real? But do we call you priest? Do we call you priestess? And we're priests. So we are currently sharing a call. The head of a church or a parish is called a rector. So we're doing something kind of radical. We're co-rectors. So we're kind of breaking some new ground, but reclaiming something. And in our particular tradition, we celebrate a whole long season that leads up to Easter. And the season is called Lent, which if you've ever seen the movie Chocolat with Johnny Depp, where they're like, don't eat, all the fancy food or whatever. The stereotypes of withholding yourself to celebrate this sort of resurrection. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah, and Easter, it's, it comes out of the Jewish Passover, which we can't wait to hear about, the Jewish traditions. And I think, but the name didn't really come about until Christianity eventually went to England. And in England, the Anglo-Saxons had this spring festival that happened around the same time that celebrated the spring goddess Aostra. And so that's kind of where the word Easter came from. The word is from pagan ideas of spring traditions, but the actual like religious holiday comes from Judaism. So Christianity is kind of this syncretism. It's this mixture of all these different traditions. And yeah, and again, we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. There's 3 big days called the Triduum, which basically, Triduum is like 3, and starts on, and we're basically reenacting the events that happened according to the Christian sacred history. Which is different than actual history, but sacred history of what we believe happened with Jesus and the disciples leading up to his resurrection. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of cool traditions that have come out of it. The one that a lot of people think about are Easter eggs, right? And you're like, what in the world does that have to do with the religious side of it?
And Easter bunnies and the fact that bunnies don't lay eggs, but I do like Cadbury eggs. Anyways, go on. I just have to say that it was always really confusing as a kid. Like, I don't get that. I thought that
they're not platypuses.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. So it's like
Easter platypus.
Yeah. So you've got this idea of these eggs, and that's just, in a lot of cultures and traditions, it's this idea of fertility. And somehow it got attached pretty early on with Mary Magdalene, who was a disciple of Jesus, and according to their tradition was the first person to see him after he had risen from the dead. So she's the first apostle in that sense. And a lot of the early icons have her holding an egg in them. And icons are Christian religious art that's used in worship, right?
You'll see like the gold halos or like all of that. And those are icons. Yeah.
Yeah.
People use them to pray.
But it really connected with a lot of what was going on in the classical world, the pagan world, with this idea of eggs and fertility. And I'm Ukrainian, so there's this whole side of Christianity, like all religions, is not monolithic. There's a lot of different expressions of it. And so in the colorful decorated eggs that you see emerged. And, there's all these legends that have come up with it, that when Mary, Jesus' mother, which is a different Mary than Mary Magdalene, went, was at the cross while he was being crucified, she had a basket of eggs because, you have to have lunch while you're watching, I guess, your son die. I don't know. But so she has this basket of eggs, but she's crying tears, and when the tears hit the eggs, that's when they become, rainbow filled and colorful. Or some of the other ones are when she goes to the tomb, right, where Jesus' body has been laid. Before she goes to the tomb, they're just regular eggs. But then when she gets there, she takes off the cloth from the basket and they're filled with bright colors, So there's all these cool traditions. And Ukrainian culture has it's like one of the last surviving remnants of a lot of folk culture. And there's this idea that if the Pysanka eggs don't continue, that this giant snake that's underneath the world will come and devour the whole world. So we have to keep painting these eggs, otherwise the snake will be unleashed, And that's kind of an example.
Much of the rest of Christianity does not know this. So just so you know, if you go forward and talk to people about Christians believe there's a snake, and that's not.
No, it's just it's interesting to see how, the faith got transmitted into different cultures and how they kept some of their, underlying religious traditions and tried to integrate it with, what they were now getting from Christianity. So it's pretty interesting.
I think the only other thing, the two things I would add just really briefly, because I want to be aware of time and I'm really excited to hear from the others, is just the idea that, one, you mentioned the Christianity is not monolithic. And so the particular sect of Christianity that we are ministers in is likely different than probably the one you see in most of the news right now, in terms of obviously we ordain women, we ordain and celebrate LGBTQ. I mean, so there's this inclusive sect of Christianity. I say that just because I want to be the counter narrative. The last thing I'll say about Easter, when I mentioned the bunny rabbits and the hare, HARE hair. So that's right, all in all of that kind of fertility gods and goddesses, connected to Aphrodite, and then her son Eros is holding a hare. And you'll see what's interesting now, if you start seeing religious pictures or icons, you'll often see some of the older ones with the Virgin Mary, Jesus's mother, holding a bunny. And it's sort of this idea of that she resisted the sexual temptation, right? Or, all of that kind of stuff. But it's really interesting if you look into paintings to notice all the symbols and kind of wonder where they came from, and just to be curious about that. And a lot of people, I think, gloss over it, but once I started seeing that, I started seeing it everywhere. So there's bunnies hidden all over. So I don't know if that answers Easter, but that hopefully gives you a little bit more than just what you see, kind of like the Mel Gibson movie, whatever.
Yeah, that was so good information. I grew up Christian and I didn't know any of that. So that was really cool. Thank you. Abby, I know your camera's not working, but if you want to go next and kind of talk about your traditions.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm a Jewish. So the spring holiday is Passover, which lasts 7 days. And it's basically you can't eat leavened grains at all. So wheat, so any bread, and it's mostly because when the Jews were escaping Egypt, they couldn't wait for anything to rise because they had to go really quickly. So we have to pretend like it's like that to remember everything. There's like different ways to celebrate it. My family usually has a Seder on the first night and then the second night. And we decided we're allowed to eat rice because otherwise it's pretty hard. But a lot of people will not even eat rice. And a lot of people only have Seders on the first day because that's the most important. Then there's always like the plagues that starts with blood and then ends with the firstborn death, which is why we also have like a bone on the Seder plate. It's for like the lamb when you spread it on your doorway. There's bitter herbs to like remember the sour times. There's vegetables with like salt water to remember tears of death, like, and all of that stuff. And then you always have to tell the story of what happened. And that's basically it that my family usually does. So
Yeah, awesome, thank you. And then owner, if you want to kind of talk about your traditions next.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. Well, as Emma introduced me, I'm also an intern at the Interfaith Center. I'm the business operations intern, so really cool experience just getting to work there. And also like using it as like a platform to like talk about like my religion too, which is something I don't really get to do often, but I'm a Muslim, so I'm going to be talking about Ramadan and something that's actually happening today as well, which is connected to Ramadan. So starting off, Ramadan is Islam follows the lunar calendar, and it's the month in the lunar calendar called Ramadan, where Ramadan is celebrated, and it's the whole month of fasting from sun up to sundown. So during that time, we don't drink water, we don't eat any food. We have everything in the morning before the sun rises, and then you go back to bed. And then the whole day there's no drinking water, no eating food. And then when the sun sets, then you have a whole dinner called iftar. And that's just the meal you have after the sun sets. And it's a whole time to remember like humility in a sense, and a time of um worship to God, because God in the Quran it says that he gave us time to fast so that we can like it's our service to him, and people will use it as a sense almost to like how a lot of people do New Year's resolutions. So like, oh, I'm going to um just be really religious, or I'm going to try to just be a bit more nice and kind. And another thing with Ramadan is God doesn't give you anything that you can't handle. So if like pregnant women or elderly or anyone who's sick or traveling, they don't have to partake in the fasting part of Ramadan. And instead, what they can do is they can feed a fasting person, so they can make up for it later, which is I think it's really interesting too. But another part of that too is I'm not sure. I'm Turkish too, so a lot of these countries, a lot of the Muslim countries, have their own traditions tied in with Ramadan, and especially with Islam as well. But in my country, I'm not sure. It's probably the same other places thinking about it. But what if you're fasting and you purposefully eat something or you drink water, then you have to make up an additional 60 days of fasting, which is really interesting too. But then another thing is, if you accidentally eat food or if you drink water, then I think what I saw online is it's like God is like gifting you the opportunity to drink water. It's like a gift from God in a sense. So that's basically all of Ramadan, from like a very fast overlook. And you're not supposed to ask a fasting person if they're fasting. Like the whole point of Ramadan is you feed people who are fasting. You don't ask them usually, and it's just how it is. And then what else? Oh, and to open the fast, I'm jumping a lot of different places. I'm sorry, but it's just all coming to me. Sorry. And to break your fast, right? The sun sets and then you go pray, right? Well, I mean after, but to break the fast, it's traditional to do it with a date or and some water usually too, which is how the Prophet Muhammad broke his fast, and we kind of carry that tradition along with us. Or other sweets too. But then you have a prayer after, and like how you see people, like it looks like the prayers that we have, like the 5 times a day prayer where you like kneel down, you bend down, that type of prayer. And it's a big community celebration. Communities will come together, like in Turkey at least, or in Turkey, they have like the mosques will hold on huge iftars for community members to come in, and it's a time to spend with family. It's a time to give back to the community. And once Ramadan is over, which is actually today's the last day of Ramadan, you have a celebration, or it's in a sense of like getting past this time of like um remembrance, in a sense, for those who like can't also eat, which is another cool thing. So you remind yourself there's less fortunate people in the world as well. But once you get past this period of fasting, there's a celebration called Eid-al-Fitir, which is just it's basically a big visitation time to celebrate. Oh, you got through Ramadan, good job. So like you'll go visit family members. People like have like, oh, they'll leave their doors open to community. They come in, and in Turkey we also call it Şeker Bayram. So you'll have like little bowls in the middle for like candies, and like kids will come around. You just give out candy to the kids, and that's something that it's last. I think the actual day is 1 day, but then celebrations last 3 days. So this is all during spring, which is interesting. And then there's I forget the actual word. Sorry, let me look it up real quick. But just 1 second. I don't remember the exact word, but during I think after Ramadan and during this time of Eid or eid-al-fitir, there's one of the pillars of Islam is also to give a part of your income to the less fortunate and to the needy, and that is also seen during this time as well. The word is it's not I it's on the tip of my tongue and I don't remember it exactly, but you'll go and give charity to the community members. And it's actually customary too, like if you have another baby on the way, right, and instead of like paying for 5 people, giving charity in 5 people, or that's worth 5 people, you'll give charity for the unborn child as well. So that's another thing. I think I covered all of my bases, and I covered them really fast. So if you guys have any questions, please hit me up. I'll be here.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
And then I just kind of want to talk about the theme of like rebirth and renewal. So just how does it fit into your personal beliefs? I know it's been touched on a little bit. Anybody can answer this, but personally, like so like in pagan holidays, my grandma is Wiccan, so we kind of half celebrate like Yostre, and then like there's another one and I'm not remembering the name of it right now. I think Ostara, but it's just like to honor spring and just like the coming back of everything living, and just like the renewing of the earth, I guess, in very simple terms. So renewal in your religion.
Yeah, for me, it's like I'm a folk practitioner, so I grew up Catholic, but I kind of do like some folk magic or different things, especially like Italian folk magic is like my thing. And so for me, spring is like a time of kind of setting my intentions for the year. So like winter is like the time of like rest and focusing on like rejuvenating our energy. And then when spring comes, it's like the time to hit the ground running. So it's like when I do a lot of my cleaning in the house, setting intentions, like doing like a lot of like protection work and trying to decide what I'm going to do like moving forward. I don't know if my message that I sent like went only to you, Emma, so I just was gonna bring this up too, that I appreciated Reverend Jessie and Reverend Dan bringing up like the pagan roots of Easter, because I've had this discussion with people, and a lot of people sometimes get offended when I like bring up like the pagan roots of some of the Christian holidays. And I understand, especially with like the political climate associated with like a lot of things in our country, but I just wanted to say that I appreciated the recognition of that because I thought that was really important.
Thanks, Kaylee. I was actually going to connect what you said to what Emma said about your grandmother, you said, is a practicing Wiccan, and austere that's the same word as Easter. So it's all sort of connected. There's certain words that we just sort of took and moved along and added. And I just think that's a really, weaving this sense of what this season is. And I think the other thing I want to say, and I appreciate on our sharing, is just this moment of, for me, thinking about all of us in this, and our various traditions have these places of fasting, of slowing down, of paying attention. And I think that is so beautiful because it's so countercultural, right? Like our culture tells us like, make decisions, make money, capitalism, do the next thing. And our religions invite us to live differently in the world, literally eating and fasting at different times. And then what I love is also this idea of our religions call us to these different seasons, but then there's celebration. Like there's this joy and there's this connection to community in all of them too, right? The charity for others in the community, the awareness that others can't celebrate like we can, the mindfulness of what we've been through, all of our people through generations, and really how we're all kind of connected to some of these, pagan roots, or these roots that precede all of the figures that we, pay attention to in our religious tradition. So I'm just really mindful of how connected we are in terms of this season and the slowing down and our siblings in other faiths.
Yeah. It just hit me now, but like the whole like following the lunar cycle, that's very pagan. And I just put two and two together right now, even though I know that it follows the whole lunar cycle, which is interesting. But like it's also the thing where it's kind of like by chance for this year that Ramadan is during this time, because it shifts completely. Like next year it's going to be in February, or it goes back. So it's just kind of cool that it all kind of happened this year and I got to talk about it now. So yeah.
I think it's also kind of cool because in media, we're often kind of convinced that every religion and every group is different and like we don't have a lot of commonalities, and kind of like inducing fear of like things that people don't understand. But when you really sit down and talk to people about their beliefs, you kind of realize that a lot of the things are in common. They might vary in like the methodology, but like the root of it is very similar and uniting.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't get my I'm on my phone. I left my backpack in my friend's car, but I was just wondering if like this time of I'm not sure about Judaism, but if this time of like fasting is like almost a way to like remember like Jesus in a way, and like I guess like what he had to go through in a sense. Like this is like another thing too. Like we still believe in Jesus too. Like he's a prophet for us as well. And we had a speaker at the Interfaith Center talking about Islamophobia, and he said the way he views it is like Islam is like a way, it is like trying to go back to like the original teachings of like Jesus in a sense. So I was like wondering with like those words, if you guys could like give like any any insight into if like us fasting is a way to like remember that?
Oh, absolutely. Because Lent, it's 40 days, right? Which is the season right before Easter. And the 40 days, part of it is to remember the 40 years in the wilderness that that the Israelites wandered around after they were freed from, after they're delivered from Egypt, which is what Passover is all about. And then Christian theology at least teaches that Jesus, in imitation of that earlier tradition, spent 40 days in the desert being tempted by the devil, and he fasted. And so that's kind of where
Before he started his
ministry. So there's like layers, right, of all that, but that it is trying to remember. You're absolutely right. Like kind of you're reliving what this prophet did, right? Like that's kind of, you're trying to follow the example. And I think that's similar to with even hearing how you talked about Ramadan, following in the prophet, Muhammad, with the dates, like, because that was the first thing that he ate after, the fasting. And so I think there's this idea of trying to imitate, holy luminaries, and that there's value in what they did by imitating their practice. I think that's pretty common to most religious beliefs and teachings.
Can I say also, one of the things that hit me, again, this may or may not be connected, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. And I love that each of the traditions, and I'm super interested, Kaylee, in how you've experienced too, Italian folklore. As one who's partially Italian, I'm like, ooh, tell me more. But that all of these traditions, like Abby, you were talking about, like, a bone is out from the lamb, or we eat a date. Like, we do these things in remembrance of and in connection to our spiritual ancestors. And I think that's also kind of that countercultural. And it's this underlay, Emma, what you originally asked was about the resurrection renewal, but I think those remembrance allows us and calls us into renewal, because we recognize that we don't do this alone, right? That we don't do our faith alone. Even as we're talking, I'm picturing you at your different tables or your different homes, and the ways that you might pray or lay out objects or use icons, or whatever it is that people have been looking at for hundreds of thousands of years. And you sort of go, oh, I too can, as you were saying, face, nothing is given to me beyond what I can face from the Holy One. Right. So I just was thinking about all of us laying out all these, like the things, the stuff of the world is kind of what invites us into our faith and into our religious practices. But they beckon sort of the holy out of us into it. So I just feel kind of connected to you all when I'm picturing all of the things that you, plus we've only been in Palm Springs for just a year and a half, but this is the land of the dates. So we're really getting into dates. And now I will be thinking about you and that as a fast breaker. And they have date shakes here, which is totally crazy. And apparently it's amazing. And it's like a sugar high. So now I want to look today and see who's breaking their fast by having a date shake.
Yeah. But about what Abby said with like putting the bone on the plate, not necessarily bone on plates, but like with like lambs and stuff. We have a whole holiday in like Islam where we remember, I guess, like Abraham and like God telling him to like kill his son, and instead he butchers a sheep or a ram or one of the very similar family members in that whole animal group. I'm not sure which one, but anyways, we have a holiday in Islam where we butcher a sheep. We get the sheep ourselves. It's very ceremonial. We pray and we let the blood drain, because that's part of being halal, is letting the blood drain. But we will do that, and I guess remembrance of that. But then we also, with that, we've tried to feed people who don't have the ability to like do that themselves. So like it's a very much giving back to the community and helping those who don't have the ability to like take part in the celebration as well. That's so, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, and then Abby, did you have any just like additional thoughts on any of it, or like rebirth, I guess?
For mostly rebirth, I've always been told that like Jews don't usually believe in that. Like it's just kind of like you die, you die. And most of the time there's no heaven or hell. You just are trying to forgive yourself and forgive others the whole life, no matter what. And for like Yom Kippur, it's always you say sorry, and after Rosh Hashanah, which is the beginning of the new year, and you in services you kind of hit your heart a couple times, which is like repenting for whatever you did and just asking God for forgiveness. And then also I was for the fasting, because we don't really believe Jesus is any like importance. Like we believe he existed, but he's not important. I always describe it as he's just kind of my homie. So for us when we fast, it's not really reminding us of Jesus, it's just reminding us of what our ancestors had to go through for the most part. So
Yeah, thank you. I know some people already touched on it, but I want to get into like the food traditions that everybody has. I know we've talked about eggs a little bit. I'm Slovak, and so we celebrate like the Orthodox traditions. So like we dye the eggs red to like symbolize the blood of Christ. I know you were talking about like the very intricate designs on eggs. My family, to do that, we silk dye Easter eggs. So that's kind of how we do it. And then Pascha bread is also extremely important. I guess, which is just like the act of like baking the bread. It's just like a ritual that commemorates the resurrection of Christ. My grandma does it every year, homemade. Nobody else is allowed to touch it. But that's kind of just what we do in our household. So if anybody wants to talk on that too.
I mean, I can add some feed a little bit, but I don't know about like food traditions in a sense other than like for Ramadan, which isn't usually an Easter either, but it depends. I mean, with like the dates and stuff and the water, but I found it interesting how like the bread is called Pascha because in Turkish at least Easter is called Paskadia. That's like how like Easter is said for us. I don't know if that's regional or if that's like common in Eastern Europe or something, but that's just I thought that was interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, it's that Pascha comes, that's like just the Greek way of talking about Passover. So I think, and this is one of the dangers, I think, anytime you think about faith traditions borrowing from each other, I think one of the things in Christianity that's an unfortunate or tragic side of the history is early Christians saw the death and resurrection of Jesus as kind of a continuation of Passover, but it eventually in a lot of folks' minds, as the centuries wore on, eclipsed or replaced. And so in that sense, it ended up, you had people saying we're the real Passover, whereas the Jewish Passover is not the real Passover. And I think that is a negative part of the history. The beautiful part of the history, I think, is a shared belief in this larger idea of Passover, which is God passing over, instead of issuing judgment on a particular group of people, passing over them, which, Christians use the word grace. Other traditions might use the word renewal, forgiveness, kind of leniency, whatever you might want to use. But that is where the idea comes from. And in Turkey in particular, right, you've got this crossroads, right, where early Christianity was there, the Orthodox tradition was there. So it's interesting to see how that word Pascha kind of continued through all of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you brought up too. Like I go to Turkey a lot. I've been very fortunate. All of my family is still there. But if anyone here knows the ancient city of Ephesus at all, I actually got to visit, and by that city, I got to go visit the House of the Virgin Mary, which was really cool. So like I'm Muslim, so I was just there, just chilling. But I went and I just like grabbed a candle. I was like, everyone else is doing it, why not? And it was really cool. Like it, I just thought it was really cool. And then like especially in Istanbul too, with like the Byzantine Empire, like there's still places that are from like the Byzantine Empire, like the Hagia Sophia, which used to be like a big church. And there's actually like this underground cavern that had like it was like a whole upside down like head of Medusa, and it was like water everywhere, and there were like places for you to walk. It was crazy. But if you guys, quick plug, if you guys have a chance to go visit Istanbul, please do. Great food.
Yeah, it's in when I was in college, right after college, I had the chance to spend like a month in Israel doing like archaeology. And it was so fascinating to see all the Islamic sites, Christian sites, Jewish sites. And our archaeology professor was basically like, once a holy place, always a holy place. And so like there could have been something that was originally a holy site for Jews that became a holy site for Christians, that became a holy site for Muslims, or vice versa. Like sometimes it was, and they were constantly going back and forth, but there was this shared idea that whatever happened there was important spiritually, which I think, again, the dark side of that is people, they wanted it for themselves rather than sharing it. And I think what's happened with the Hagia Sophia, I think it's a museum now, right? And it's a beautiful example of sharing all the different layers of the different religious traditions and how it's kind of a gift to all people, which is pretty cool.
The old city in Israel, because I've been many times, just luckily, but the old city in Israel is always my favorite because there's so many different sections for different religions. And it's just like really pretty going through it, which if you're Jewish, you can't go to certain sides of them, so on, so on. So I've only been to the Jewish side, but it's pretty. And then you can like look over and see the other sides and see how they're all acting with it, which like the Western Wall is a very, very, very important place, especially for Jews. So that's always interesting seeing like what people think about that.
Yeah, and then that's all the questions specifically I had. So I will just open this time for anybody watching and listening to ask questions, or if anybody has questions for each other.
Well, I just want to ask Kaylee, you unmuted and I didn't know if you were going to talk about food, and that was your original question. I always say food equals love, and that's probably what's going to be on my tombstone if I have a tombstone. And it's the only thing Jesus said to remember him by is in a meal. So I enjoy hearing about food.
Yeah, so I'm Italian, so my family, everything is always Italian food. But even though Catholic only would not eat meat on Fridays, my grandma just doesn't eat meat, period, at all during Lent. So a lot of like seafood pasta dishes and things like that are like what we do. We also do like a lot of like different breads with like just like bruschetta and things like that. Is what we'll do. But a lot of like what like we've done in my family is a lot of like ancestor like reverence during this time of year. So we have like an ancestor altar that's in my grandparents' house, and we'll like pray, and we'll put like just different things, like different flowers like that they would have enjoyed when they were alive, things like that. So it's kind of interesting because my family, it's like my grandma won't call it like folk magic, but that's really what it is. She's like, oh, like I'm just Catholic, like that's what we do. But a lot of what she does really is kind of magic-y. And for me, I personally like just, with everything going on and just like have been kind of struggling with like Christian parts of my identity and not really sure like what to do with it. But I do kind of dive into like the Italian folk magic aspect of my identity a lot because of growing up and just the ease of access.
Do you like tarot? Is that a part of it as well? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's an Instagram account. I can't remember what
Brittany, I'll look it up and put it in the chat, but she just wrote a book on Christianity and the tarot card, and we've been referring it to people because it's incredible. Like, but
That's awesome. One of the people that I have invited to come hopefully do an event with us this summer, they run a podcast in California, and it's about Catholic folk magic. And I thought that'd be really fun because I'm a Patreon supporter of their channel, and they do readings for me every month and stuff. So I thought it'd be really cool to kind of like bring this new perspective of Christianity to like the picture as well, just because it's like the one that's like resonated for me. But yeah, I appreciate you guys like being open too. It gives me hope.
I don't really have a question, but a comment. One, I loved all of this. It's so fun to hear all the different perspectives and to just see the thread of shared values. But yeah, thanks for the shout out for Christian tarot cards, because I did not know that was a thing. But fun fact, my name is Carrie, and I actually have made my own set of Christian tarot cards, and I have sets of them. So I will show you all, those of you who come to the Interfaith Center. But it's so fun to know, because I've always been a little like, I have like 50 sets of them that I got printed and I give them as presents, but I'm always like a little scared to give them to people, right? Because there's some negative stigma. So I guess I'm curious, have you found that there's stigma around tarot cards, and why? Like, why are people afraid of that? I'm curious to know if anyone has thoughts on that.
I think for me, the stigma really comes from the media, and like how in like movies or TV shows they show tarot cards and it's like, oh, there's death. And then it's like, oh, it's a bad omen. You're gonna die. And I'm like, I don't want to know if I'm gonna die sometime soon. So like I just really like stayed away from like tarot. And then the other day I was at the center with Kaylee and she did a tarot card reading for me. I was like, oh, this is chill. I like it. So I mean, I guess that's where it really came from for me.
Yeah, when you say that, I don't know if any of you saw The White Lotus. You know, there's like the scene where what's her name? Jennifer Coolidge gets her tarot cards read, and it's like so dramatic and it's so ridiculous. And I love her anyway, so it's whatever. So I think you're right. It's like media, but I also think, you know, you think about like the Harry Potter movies when they're like learning, like, you know, how to read the tea leaves and all this stuff. And I think what it speaks to is like the innate and deep sense that we as humans long to make meaning. We long to find what is holy, what is true. We look for signs, even if we're like very rational and go, oh, I'm not that person, you know. And I think about, you know, I'm blanking out. Abby, you might answer it, but who in the Hebrew faith sets out the fleece for like God to get wet in the morning or whatever that, you know, I'm talking about. Anyways, we're people who are looking for signs. And so I think that there is also this like anxiety or fear maybe that those kinds of ways might lead people astray or might be counter to the message of whatever the central religion is, right?
Well, and I think that's why it's important to understand within a religion, along with when you do dialogue between different religions, there's dialogue happening within each religious tradition, right? There's like the ones that the stories or the traditions that end up kind of becoming the dominant one, but there's always these minor threads too. And sometimes the minor threads are like actively persecuted by the dominant tradition, and other times they're kind of tolerated, or, you know, and it's interesting to see that. And I think with this whole idea of magic, you know, you have this fundamentalist trend in, at least in, I can speak from the Christian tradition, looking in certain parts of the Torah are very anti-magic, but the rationale behind it is when the Torah was written, the people were in exile and were at risk of losing their entire faith identity because they would have been assimilated into the Babylonian gods and goddesses. So there's this very other idols. And so magic could lead into that. So it's almost like the safeguard, it's the survival mechanism, right? Well, if you've moved past that survival mechanism, maybe those safeguards aren't needed anymore.
Mhm.
So there's other parts of, the Jewish scriptures which are very pro magic. And even in the time of Christ, one of the things Christ is known for is these exorcisms, right? Which is often associated with magic.
Mhm.
But there were Jewish exorcists that were also doing that around the same time. And I think whereas these other practitioners had to mix the salt and the fire and the oil, you know what I mean? So it's like it's interesting to see how all that emerges. But I think the idea of magic, there's always a dialogue within religious traditions, and there's a fine line too, right? Where does religion end and science begin? Where does religion end and magic begin, and what are the boundaries of those things? One, in fact, I feel like I'm all over the place, but that's what I love about interfaith dialogue. There's like so many threads to connect.
Mhm.
Is you hear the word hocus pocus, right? Which is often associated with magic. Those come from the Latin words in the Mass, in the Eucharist. This is my body, this is my blood. And so I think Shakespeare took that and said, oh, this is, hocus pocus, like made that about magic, but it's this idea of what's happening in communion. So if you follow that line of reasoning, magic is at the heart of the most central Christian ritual, which is the Eucharist, right? So it's interesting to think about all those things.
Mhm. Mhm.
I just quickly from my end. I mean, I think it's interesting. In Islam at least, um, I know idol worship is forbidden in a sense. Like you're like in depictions of the Prophet Muhammad, we don't show a face to him. He's seen as faceless because then people would worship him instead of God. And like statues are forbidden. Just having statues are because then you'd worship that as if it were God too. So there's stuff like that too, which is interesting. And then I know like you mentioned like where does science end, like that whole thing. I don't remember the exact quote. I'm not good with words, but it was for us like I think like Islam has been like very lenient on like accepting science just because like for a time like many Muslim scholars like help like with many innovations like mathematics and health care in a sense like those and it also goes under look too like how we were really innovative for that part, but I think in that case like I know like we my family at least is very liberal in that sense like we believe in science I guess so I mean I think that kind of attributes to that and yeah.
For the Jewish faith, I've always been told the story how Judaism started was Abraham's father ran a shop and it was all like these little tiny statues, and God then spoke to Abraham and goes, no, bad. And then he had to like break every little idol in his dad's shop. And then he was like, you can't pray to these things. You have to only idolize God. And that's how it all started. I don't know a lot about magic in the Jewish faith at all. But like I do know during Passover, when they were in the desert trying to walk, they got really hungry and there was like no food. So then God sent down it was like grain sort of, that if you ate it and you were thinking of some sort of food, it would taste exactly like that food. And it was like all happy. And I guess like that was the only magic I've really heard of at all in the Jewish faith. Or Hanukkah with the oil that lasted for 8 days instead of it only supposed to be lasting for 1 day was pretty magical. But Hanukkah is not a very big part of Jewish religion, actually, because it's not in the Torah whatsoever.
For Islam, I don't really hear a lot of well, I mean, actually there is some magic I've heard of. Like for us, like all the prophets have like different like powers. Like for like us, like Jesus was like he could help people, and then like still like the wine stuff as well. But then there are other prophets who could speak to animals, like speak just like that too. And then um I know there's a story about like in Mecca. Mecca's a huge site, but there was, I'm not exactly sure of the names, but there's this lady and she had a crying baby in her arms, and she was running around like through Mecca just like trying to find water for her crying son who was thirsty. And I think she was like praying to God like, please, like we need water. And like then like God accepted her prayer, and like I think it was either she set the baby down and the baby's like pounding, like running on, like the baby running on the ground became like springs of water. Like God's like made that into like water, or if the lady's like running, like her footsteps were what became like fountains that like never ended. And apparently like they still haven't ended running. I'm not sure, but I guess that's kind of like some of the magic I've heard.
I just love that we're talking about magic, because I think a lot of times in our particular traditions, we call them miracles. And I think that there's this, I think that's probably what draws us to it in whatever way, is stories or the items or the things that remind us that the force in the universe, the Holy One, God, Allah, wherever we sort of root it, that the power of love and provision is bigger than whatever it is we're facing, which sort of goes back to your original question about renewal, right? That all this stuff happens in the springtime that calls us to be mindful. We've rested, we've paid attention, and we cling back to the things that we know to be true, which is that love is the greatest force, and that, we can shine that out of our own sense of our own rebirth or our own renewal or our own emerging out of the darkness or out of exile into being also beacons of that into the world. And it in this conversation, it just is really hope-filled for me anyways, to say, I'm so glad you all get to go out into the world and be that, because I think the world is looking for that, is looking for people who are beacons of hope and renewal and promise of life after exile, life after fasting, life after, so regardless of what happens in the afterlife, the current life we know is all we get to sort of live this out, right?
It's interesting to me too, because I think a lot of the issues with like magic, especially like when it's discussed, is like people just not really understanding what magic actually is. Like all of these stereotypes of like what magic is, when in reality, like when I say like I've done magic, it's like, oh, I'm a little anxious today. Let me put these herbs into a tea and that will help me to feel better. It's like using like natural things in a way that's like geared towards specific problems. And that's what I kind of like about folk magic is like magic for the people. So it's like using everyday items to solve problems. It's not even like I have a wand and I'm going to do this dangerous thing. So it's kind of interesting.
I think we're going to see more of an emergence of folks that gravitate more towards magic as a part of their spiritual practice as technology grows, and especially as we deal with climate change, because as we see kind of the ravaging effects of consumerism at all costs, kind of what you were talking about, there's this desire to be rooted back in things that are connected to the everyday things, the earth and all of these things. And I think there's something to that we have lost. There's a lot of gains we've gained from technology, but some of the core stuff with those magical practices, we said, oh, we have science now, we don't need that anymore. Well, actually, like we need to hold them both hand in hand. Like science is good, medical care is good. We love all of that. But if it's not grounded in what we have in the earth, it can run amok and really cause a lot of problems. And the earth is kind of fighting back right now against a lot of that.
In other words, keep making that tea.
or if people can't even access the medical help that we do have, they have to do what they have to do to solve problems. So it's interesting. That's what I like about folk magic of the people.
Yeah, that's all really good. If anybody has any final questions or final thoughts, I think I'm gonna wrap this up. Final thoughts?
To me, this is like a to be continued thing.
Yeah.
Because I think
for
that there's
sure.
a lot of like potential for like more events. I'm the new program director, if anybody doesn't know. So I'm just really excited to, keep planning some events for the summer, and Emma and Owner have been amazing. So yeah, I will definitely be in touch with you guys about, future events, because I think having your input has been really amazing.
Yeah. Owner, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was like, stop. Just on my own, just being like, I know, thanks. We're all working together really hard. And I like how this is like the one event in a sense that we kind of put on that's like really interfaith. Like we put on separate individual events, but this is the first since Emma and I have been here that we really put on that was really like just this whole like discussion dialogue type of thing, which I really appreciate. And I hope we can have more. So look out for emails. You don't get to run away.
Okay. I just want to thank everybody again for coming. This recording will be up on our YouTube probably shortly. And that's all. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye, everyone.